Now, if you go back to Numbers chapter 20, where we began, and you look at verse 12, notice that God didn't repeat Moses and Aaron's actual actions. He went straight to the core issue, and he rebuked Moses because he didn't trust in him or honor him. What I want to do now is I want us together, let's look at the manifestations of his distrust. I titled this message, Defensive Moses, because he displayed defense mechanisms. We all do. Now, you've seen me in vlogs in the past use the book, The Missing Commandment, Love Yourself. And this is from Jerry and Denise Basel. And they teach about defense mechanisms. Now see, they necessarily begin in childhood, and they protect children. But as adults, they're proof that we place our trust in our own power instead of in God to be our defense, our protection, and our strength. They create self-built walls which become fortified over the years, and that results in our hearts becoming hardened or even detached from God. The bottom line is they're actually a demonic form of deception. In Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding. Think about him in all your ways, and he will lead you on the right paths." So the Lord tells us to look to him in everything, not to ourselves, to rely on him to defend us, to protect us for our strength, not ourselves. He wants us to be weak and vulnerable and defenseless. Now, I picture defensiveness like this, or this is a good posture. That kind of speaks someone's protecting themselves, they're being defensive. But when we choose to become weak and vulnerable and defenseless, it's like opening our arms wide before God, exposing everything, exposing our heart, and trusting him to protect us. Now, the Basels teach us that there are 14 types of defense mechanisms that exist. And I think in this episode that we just read from Moses' life that he displayed 3. The first one is defensive anger, which means you use anger as a defensive shield. Now, scholars often say that Moses had an anger problem, and I think it was revealed this day that he did. You see, he called them names, remember? You rebels. He spoke with disrespect, and he shouted. And there's an exclamation point in my Bible, and it says he shouted. And he struck the rock twice, and I believe he struck it in anger. When we allow anger to take on a life of its own, it creates a source of defense and power that blocks deeper issues that often we need to express. Now, the second defense mechanism that I believe was self-reliance. That's when we avoid our feelings by becoming strong in our own ability. It was as though Moses thought his own strength could supply the water, but the water was God's to supply, not Moses. "Must we bring you water from this rock?" Remember, that's what he said to the people. And remember I told you when we read that part to write down the word grace when the water did come out of the rock? Did you notice? Even with Moses and Aaron being disobedient to God, even with the people complaining about their situation and where they were, where God actually had them, they were complaining to Moses and Aaron, but they were actually complaining against God. He loved them enough to give them what he knew they needed. He still provided the water. That's grace. That's a little side note. "Must we bring you water from this rock?" Moses did not model trust in God before the people when he said that and when he did what he did. When he struck the rock, he was acting in disbelief, in unbelief. And oftentimes, our acts of disobedience reveal an underlying attitude of unbelief. We aren't just saying, I don't want to do it that way, when God's giving us an instruction, giving us some guidance. We're essentially saying to God, I do not believe your plan is the best. Matthew Henry says that Moses' unbelief was the great transgression, and his actions were an assault on the holiness of God. That's strong. That's some pretty harsh criticism. That's throwing Moses under the bus, isn't it? So the first DM was defensive anger, and the second DM was self-reliance, and the third DM that I believe he showed was projection. That's when we blame others for things that are not their fault. We feel bad about something that we said or did, but instead of taking responsibility for our action and feeling healthy shame, we blame it on someone or someone else or something else. And Moses blamed the people for his sin. Remember when we were reading, he said, and the Lord was also angry with me because of you. He was blaming the Israelites for what he did. Now, in Psalm 106:33, and you can look this up if you'd like, it tells us that the Israelites were embittered, or that they embittered Moses and provoked him. But Moses, he was still responsible for the way he responded and for his actions. You see, he was guilty of the sin of distrust. Moses trusted in himself instead of trusting in God. But this didn't just affect him. He discouraged the people's hope in God. He modeled self-strength, self-reliance, blame, and rebellion. And he was also guilty of usurping the place of God. And we are too, when we trust in ourselves through DMs instead of trusting in God. We do the same thing when we live a life that operates in a pattern continually of defense mechanisms. Now, it's kind of heavy, but there's always good news, right? So I want to share something with you. This is from the Dr. David Jeremiah Study Bible, and it is his introduction to the book of Deuteronomy. And he talks about Moses. He says, Moses' fondest desire through the weary decades of the wilderness experience would not be fulfilled. He would not be allowed to enter the promised land along with the new generation of Israelites. When Yahweh, God, gave him clear instruction at Kadesh for getting water for the people, Moses violated the command, misrepresenting the Lord before all the people in a fit of anger. Through the heartbreaking discipline that followed, Moses learned that the shepherd was no less accountable than the sheep. Although Moses was bruised by that incident, Yahweh himself bound up his servant's wounds. The final scene of Moses and the Lord together in Moab just before Moses' death is poignant and bittersweet. Moses climbed Mount Nebo, and the Lord was there, showing him all the land across the Jordan, from the north to the west and the south. The Lord told him, "This is the land of which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have caused you to see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." There was no animosity, no bitterness between them. With great honor for his friend, the Lord buried Moses himself upon his death, and the prophet's mission was complete. There was God's grace again, right? And it's available to all of us as his children. So, we've observed, we've interpreted, now let's apply. Are you defensive? Am I defensive? I have to tell you, before I understood defense mechanisms and allowed the Lord to reveal mine, which I'm not going to tell you how many I had out of the 14. It was more than 3. I was a defensive person, definitely. Projecting like Moses did, oh, that was one of my tops. I was a pro at that. Are you defensive? The only effective way to find healing, deep healing for our heart is to embrace godly weakness. So take some time now. Just sit before the Lord. Ask Holy Spirit to expose any defense mechanisms in your life. Any ways that you self-protect, any ways that you don't trust Him to protect you, any ways you have self-built walls around your heart. The Basels have a prayer in their book that I want to pray right now for you and for me. Father, I need your help. I know that I've developed ways to protect myself from pain, especially pain that started long ago. I need you to show me the ways in which I have done this. Although I am uneasy and even fearful of opening this door, I want to live from the place of abundant life that your Son came to give me. As you expose the ways I have learned to protect myself, please give me the grace to reject my self-made shields and mechanisms. I invite you in to defend and protect me. I ask you to make me weak with a godly weakness so I can live from your strength, Lord. I ask you to make me defenseless in my own ability so that you can truly be my defense. And I tell you that I am willing to feel what you would have me feel, no more and no less than you say is necessary. I am willing, by your grace, to be emotionally honest, transparent, and vulnerable before you and before others who you say are trustworthy. I pray this all in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.